This week we're starting a new series, Ben Adam L'Chaveiro. So we know, in general, there are different categories of mitzvahs. We're familiar with mitzvahs aseh, positive commandments, lav and los aseh, negative commandments. So those are two basic categories, but there are other categories as well, and those are the nature of the commandments, Ben Adam L'Makom, commandments between man and God, and Ben Adam L'Chaveiro, commandments interpersonal between people. And we'll see perhaps the Vilna Gaon is a third category, which we'll probably get to in the Ben Adam L'Chaveiro series. There's a connection between Ben Adam Liatzmo, we'll see there's a third category between you and yourself. We'll come back to that one, probably not tonight, but over the next couple of weeks. So tonight's year we'll just focus more in general, some fundamentals, some nafkaminas, practical differences between mitzvahs ben adam l'makom, mitzvahs between man and God, and ben adam l'chaveiro. And then we'll go into specific mitzvahs ben adam l'chaveiro. And if anyone has any specific requests of topics on the ben adam l'chaveiro, we could take them as well. So the first thing that usually comes up in a difference between a mitzvah ben adam l'makom and a mitzvah ben adam l'chaveiro is the first thing we do before we do a mitzvah. The Gemara tells us in Pesachim that we make our brachas usually over l'asiyason. We make our brachas before. First we make the bracha and then we do the mitzvah. That's the general rule. As we'll see, there are many exceptions to the rule. So, and in fact, the Gemara tells us that there are other mitzvahs. Sometimes you make the bracha achar asiyas. In the classical case is a ger, a would-be Jew, someone who is going to convert to Judaism and they have to go to the mikveh. So obviously before they go into the mikveh they're not Jewish, so they can't make a bracha. So clearly that's the example of a bracha that has to be done after the mitzvah, because first you go into the mikveh and then afterwards you make, they go in, the minute you go into the mikveh again, you dip again, but that's not the halakhic dipping. The one is when you go in the first time, that's when you become Jewish. So I guess they want to make it kind of over l'asiyasa, kind of like they do by hadlachas neiros Shabbos. The woman tries to cover her eyes before, or the man, whoever's making the hadlachas neiros, and you cover your eyes, so to speak, not to get hana, not to get benefit. So the bracha is going beforehand. So in general, usually the brachas come beforehand, but there are brachas that come afterwards as well. And that's birkas ha-mitzvah, the different categories of mitzvahs. That is usually a bracha before you do a mitzvah, the bracha is beforehand, but there are exceptions as we saw by ger and other things as well. And then there are other categories, there's birkas ha-nenin, there's brachas you make before you eat. That is clearly you do before you eat, because the brachas we make after, birkas hamazon, ala mechya, that's more birkas hashevach, perhaps brachas of praise, but it's not a heter to eat. And the third category is birchak shevach v'hodah. We have brachas we make on praising HaKadosh Baruch Hu, on the greatness of Hashem, shevach v'hodah. So it's not always clear which. As we'll see, one of the topics we'll have to get into, we'll have to define exactly what is a mitzvah ben adam l'chaveiro, because the fact there are people in it, obviously without people in it, it's probably not going to be a ben adam l'chaveiro. But with people involved, doesn't necessarily make it a ben adam l'chaveiro, as we'll see. Let's say for the mitzvah of kiddushin, the mitzvah of getting married, you need a man and a woman to get married, but that's generally classified as a mitzvah ben adam l'makom, a mitzvah between man and God, even though of course there are people involved and there's misameach chasam v'kala, other mitzvahs involved, but we assume kiddushin is a mitzvah ben adam l'makom. In fact, that's a major machlokes or rishonim, exactly the nature of the mitzvah. Is kiddushin a mitzvah at all? In fact, there's the famous shita of the Rambam. The Rambam's opinion is that kiddushin is a mitzvah like any other mitzvah, and therefore you make a bracha. And that's what we'll see. According to the Rambam, you make a bracha on Kiddushin, so that clearly shows the Rambam's opinion that Kiddushin is a mitzvah ben adam l'makom. But the Rambam says you make a bracha like all other mitzvahs, over l'asiyason. Before you do the Kiddushin, before you do the actual marriage, you make the bracha. That's the Rambam's opinion. And you have the famous sheet of the Rush in Ksuvis and the Ran, that perhaps Kiddushin isn't a mitzvah. In fact, the mitzvah we read about last week, and we'll read about this week, the mitzvah of Pru Ravu, the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply, that's the mitzvah. Kiddushin, just a hechatimsa, the mitzvah is to have kids, but you wanted to have kids, the preferable way is to get married. As we'll see, we're not going to go into now, but the famous Minchas Chinuch discusses about even if you commit adultery and you have a mamzer, perhaps you could fulfill your mitzvah of Pru Ravu. Not the recommended way, but nevertheless, post facto, you might get the mitzvah. That gets into a separate topic of Pru Ravu. But to the Rosh Hashita there is no mitzvah of Kiddushin per se. The mitzvah is having children. It's the Pru Ravu. So there is and therefore, what's the practical difference between the Rosh and the Rambam? When do you make the bracha? What type of bracha is it? The bracha we make, according to the Rambam, is a birkas ha-mitzvah, even though it's not the classical nusach. It's not a mitzvah's kedushin or kaddish isha. We go into isarayas and other things that isn't the classical birkas ha-mitzvah, yet the Rambam classifies it as a birkas ha-mitzvah. The Rosh says, that's my raya. It doesn't say a mitzvah's kedushin or kaddish isha. We talk about all the chuppah and arayas and other areas to show there's something. It's a bracha on the institution of marriage. It's a bracha, and not in a negative way as they might portray on the media, but in the halachic sense we're talking about it's a good thing, the institution of marriage, and therefore you're making a bracha. So according to the Rosh, you make the bracha afterwards, after the man and woman get married. So the bracha would be, because you make a birkas ha-shavach, it's after it happens. Like we usually on thunder, lightning, because it makes sense. And after it happens, then you're praising God on His great qualities. But so according to the Rambam, you make the bracha before. According to the Rosh and the Ran, you make the bracha after. There's an interesting opinion of the Ravid, who seems to take a middle opinion. He agrees in principle with the Rambam that Kedushin is a bracha before a mitzvah. However, he says to make the bracha afterwards. So, why is that? I understand the Rambam is consistent, the Rosh is consistent. The Rambam says it's a birkas ha-mitzvah, you make the bracha beforehand. The Rosh says it's a birkas shavach v'aldah, you make it after. Why would the Ravid say, go against the general principle of a birkas ha-mitzvah, you make it over l'asiyasan? So in that they explain the Ravid that because there's another factor here which ties into what we discussed, and why we'll have to discuss why it's not considered Adam Machavero, because there are two people involved. But the Ravid writes a general cloud, which we assume also in other areas. We know we have a Kedushin is totally on someone else. You're hoping the woman accepts the Kedushin. So he's concerned anytime you're going to make a bracha, and you're not as much control as we ever have over anything, but at least it's quasi in our control with a balabas, so to speak, so that we can make a bracha. We assume I'm going to go make the bracha and put on the tefillin or sit in the sukkah. But if something happens, I'm an honest. But by something which involves someone else, so who says the woman's going to accept the Kedushin? So therefore he says that because it's totally b'das achir, it's a birkas ha-mitzvah, but you make it after to make sure that it shouldn't be a bracha l'vatala. Kind of like
that's the sheet of the
Rash,
who says by tzedakah. So then I would expect that there'd be no bracha.
Right, exactly. That's something to get to right now. Yeah, so that's Leis is alluding to. That's the famous Tshuvas HaRashba. Why don't we make a bracha on tzedakah in general? Or did I? Yeah. So therefore, the famous answer to the Rashba is, I can't make a bracha because maybe the ani won't accept it. You know what? An ani won't accept it. When does that ever happen to you? Well, it does happen once in a while. The ani might have a little chutzpah, which is famous ma'aseh with the brisker Rav. So I think an ani came over to him, I guess in Eretz Yisrael, and I don't know all the details, but he was very, I guess the brisker Rav took him as being too aggressive, too much as a mechutzav, and he said to him, "You're not an ani. You're a phony." So he said that, but he quoted a pasuk saying that an ani is someone who is humble, and another, a more of an ashir acts like with chutzpah. So he quoted some pasuk, I think it was in Navi somewhere, and he got upset at the guy. But in general, where you have people that what $10. I didn't come here for $10. I need at least 100, 360, 1,000, whatever it is. So then I'm not. Then they don't take your check or they don't take the cash. So therefore, I'm not saying it happens that often, but since it's dependent on the ani, and we see a yisod that we'll get to, that the Rashba is saying the mitzvah tzedakah is not you giving it, it's the ani accepting it. But if it's you giving it, it won't be an issue. So we see part of the mitzvah tzedakah, as we'll see, is that the poor person actually gets food or money, whatever we're talking about. So that's the famous Chuvas HaRashba, but since it's dependent on someone else, hence no bracha. So that's what raises this question. So then, how do we reconcile? Maybe the Ravid and the Rashba argue, but let's assume they don't. How come when it came to the mitzvah of Kedushin, the Ravid said instead of making the bracha beforehand, make the bracha afterwards? So why not say the same, which makes sense. So why not say the same thing by tzedakah? That, okay, you can't make the bracha before you give the tzedakah, but once the ani gets it, why not make a bracha then? So that's in general. Putting this issue aside, is a general machlokas, the Rambam and the Or Zarua, the Rambam, Maimonides and the Or Zarua, whether you can make a bracha after the mitzvah. The issue that they're talking about is shchita, which is assuming again that shchita is a mitzvah, but they're discussing on the union of shchita, you make the bracha, a shchita. So the question is, if you shechted the animal, you didn't make a bracha, could you still make the bracha afterwards? So the Rambam says no, the bracha has to be before. Once the mitzvah is done, that's it. And the Or Zarua says yes, l'chadchila, it's preferable to make the bracha beforehand. But of course, if you don't make it beforehand, you make the bracha afterwards. It gets into what is the nature of the bracha you make of Birkas HaMitzvah. Is it basically to prepare you? Is it a hachana for the mitzvah? Or is it to enhance the mitzvah? So the Rambam seems to go with the hachana. It's a preparation. Once you did the mitzvah, it doesn't make sense to do the preparation after the mitzvah. But if you say the bracha enhances the mitzvah, so that to really enhance it, you do the bracha beforehand, but making the bracha afterwards still plays some role. So that's a general machlokas in Birkas HaMitzvah. We usually have some compromise, but let's say it's a mitzvah nimshechet, let's say Ner Chanukah. For instance, let's say you forgot to make the bracha, but let's say within the first 30 minutes the candle is still being lit. So then, if the candles already went out, that's a separate issue, or maybe after the 30 minutes. But many poskim amekel that Hanukkah is another issue, making a bracha perhaps on hiddur mitzvah. But besides that, there's an issue of a mitzvah like talis. If I forgot to make a bracha, but I'm still wearing my talis, so then the poskim amekel already that you could still make a bracha because it's a mitzvah that's continuing. But it's a general machlokas the Rambam or Zarua. In general, we pass like the Rambam. We don't make a bracha after a mitzvah, except if it's a separate type of mitzvah, a continuous mitzvah while you're still doing it. So then I guess it's kind of like an overlap anyway, so it's okay. So the question is, yeah.
So we're saying Kedushin is a mitzvah because it links up to Puravu. Does that mean it's not a mitzvah for the woman?
Right. So the one is if you Puravu in general, it's the discussion. The Gemara we paskin, and that's a beautiful Meshach Chachma in this week's parsha. Why it's so, but. That's the irony is a woman is exempt from Puravu, but she's the one having the baby. So why would a woman be exempt from Puravu? That's the famous Meshach Chachma in this week's parsha. Actually, I might as well tell you that he actually gets two answers. One is a psychological one is a physical one. One is psychologically speaking, because the halacha is the Gemara talks about whether it applies today or not in separate share, but let's say a couple can't have children. So really, strictly speaking, Medina Gemara, you don't necessarily have to divorce the wife, because during those days you could have many wives, or more than one wife. So therefore you go ahead and try to have a child with someone else. There's a mitzvah of Puravu. But a woman obviously can't have two husbands. For Rabbi, you don't know who the father of the child is, so a woman so therefore it's going to put her in a situation where you're going to force a woman, a husband and wife are love each other, and you're going to force them, if she was chayiv and pruvu, you'd have to force her to divorce, to get a divorce, separate. And he said that psychologically speaking...
It's strange because that's only a Durban.
What?
It's strange because the thing is that Shoshana is only a Durban.
Right, no, they get right, Maker I did right, we don't...
But Maker a din, there's no chiyuv to divorce. The Meshach Chachma is using an argument You say this is why women's
He's just more, yeah, he's giving it more.
But
It's more time. He's not giving a halakhic answer per se.
he's basing the fact
The same right.
But it's really not it's not a key.
Right, and the second way, the other answer is because Noah, because Hashem's ways are sweet and pleasant, and to make someone go through to command a woman and say you have to have kids and then go through the pain of childbirth, so that's already very strong. But at least indirectly is she doesn't have the chiyuv. The Ran talks about maybe she has the mitzvah of aiding and abetting, or the mitzvah of helping out. Maybe she does have a mitzvah of l'shevesh or the other things she might be commanded in. But God didn't want to give a direct command on a mitzvah that involves so much pain, and therefore He didn't command her. So either way, those different. You can look up the Meshach Chachma on Parashas Noah. But
by bris, the Torah quotes the Itur and the Rav Sar Shalom that the second bracha should be after the bris if you're not doing it yourself, because if you don't have control, it should be done afterwards. Doesn't quote the Ravid, doesn't quote the Rosh.
Actually, I think it was because the Minchas Chinuch discusses it. I think he discusses the Rosh as some type of compromise. Exactly at what point it is the meal and pre. At what time you make the Rosh. So I think the Minchas Chinuch does quote the Rosh. He talks about.
But the Torah just quotes. I mean, it's so obscure. Rav Sar Shalom and the Itur. When he could have quoted the Rosh and the Ravid. I just wonder why.
Interesting why he didn't quote him, because I think the Rush. I think
stretched.
Yeah, because the Minchas Chinuch even I think quotes the Rush. I remember over there by talking about why you make one of the brachas and in the middle to try to get it over Lasiyasan and that. Yes, I'm not sure why he didn't. I think the Minchas Chinuch does quote the Rush, but I'm not sure why the Torah wouldn't quote him. So they point out that therefore. So the Rambam's opinion is you make the bracha beforehand. The Rosh's opinion you make it after, and the Ravid. So the Ravid says it's a birkas hamitzvah. You make it afterwards because we're afraid the woman might say no. What about tzedakah? So either way, either by tzedakah make a bracha afterwards, like kedushin, or let the Ravid say no bracha. We know. So it's two different opinions, but let's try to reconcile. So we can reconcile by saying there are other reasons why you don't make a bracha on tzedakah. So maybe really he agrees. Fundamentally, you would make a bracha on tzedakah afterwards, because once the person has it, assuming you hold that you can make a bracha after the mitzvah, which is a major machloek. But assuming, according the Ravid seems to say it's obviously the Ravid says it's true. So why not it also be true by tzedakah? So that there are many other reasons why you don't make a bracha on tzedakah. So one being the famous answer, like we gave, the Gemara tells us, let's say, there's a mitzvah before Pesach, a bitul chametz and bir chametz. There's a mitzvah, we nullify the chametz to avoid vayura bayimatzah, we also burn it. To make sure you don't come in and you forget that, you see a pastrami sandwich and you forget it's Pesach, you just eat it. So they point out that so why we make the bracha we make the bracha not on the bitul, which is daraisa, that's the biblical. Biblically speaking, you nullify the chametz in your heart, bitul b'leiv sagi. So why do we make the bracha on the mitzvah d'Rabbanan? So that's what I think the Beis Yosef brings down from the Kolbo, others, that this is so that Chazal only institute a bracha when there's a maisa. There's something like there's a measuring stick. We can't judge. That's why it's easier to find. It's easier to see who's a Talmid Chacham versus who's a tzaddik. A tzaddik is something you really can't necessarily judge by. There's no set measuring stick to put the scale on and see. But this is a concrete thing, so then you can measure it. So when it comes to a ma'isa, so therefore something which is outwardly we could see, so then Chazal instituted a bracha. But tzedakah, and the Ramah seems to pass in that way, that when even b'machshava, let's say someone's making an appeal, and you raise your hand to give $100, and they forgot to call on you, and they said, great, and you were planning on giving that, so perhaps you're still chayiv in giving that, because once the machshava, you assume you were going to give the money, so by halachos of tzedakah, are even b'machshava, so that's why some say there's no bracha. So maybe you're right. If in principle you should make a bracha after the tzedakah, according to the Ravid. But the reason why tzedakah is different, that's something belay. But kedushin, that's an act, and therefore we could see afterwards if the woman
I don't understand. If you're gonna give it with a Maisa, that's only good if you're gonna you make a neder. It's only to help you.
I know, but fundamentally, any
You're saying that because there is an option.
for instance, I'd say it's anything like tshuva. I mean, tshuva is we have the whole different. The Rambam goes through a whole hilchos tshuva, giving you all the do's and don'ts. That's all with the vida and everything else. But ultimately, tshuva is believe, as the Mishnah says in Kedushin, that someone says, I'm going to marry this woman, Almanas, that I'm a tzaddik gomer, and this person's clearly not a tzaddik gomer. The Gemara says, Safek Kedushin, you need a get. What's the question? Shema hirer belibo. Perhaps he had a thought, a mere passing thought of tshuva. So we see that the mere thought of tshuva already gives you, in terms of a status of almost of a tzaddik, assuming it was. Tshuva. Again, tshuva involves a mice, and you're giving the tzedakah, but the yesod is something which can be fulfilled. That is if you're obligated in it's b'machshava, so therefore Chazal also never instituted a bracha on that secondary maisa.
Kind of like Obama having a thought about peace and getting
but the lady's question is still the lady's question is the thought can be mechayev you maybe. But are you not yotze the mitzvah? Once you do the mitzvah, you're yotze the mitzvah. Even if you were thinking probably the wrong thing, I don't want to give tzedakah, I don't know, whatever. No, but you're still yotze the mitzvah tzedakah.
Yeah, but beer chametz also. You see that they say why should you do bracha by beer, but you do it by beer. So once it becomes a meiser, you just split it up. If there's a problem with doing the bracha, putting stackers with shava, don't do it then. But do it when the meiser is same way as by beer.
Right, that's right. So by beer, they're burning the chametz, and therefore they're making.
Therefore, by the meiser, they're saying make the bracha, even though you could have.
Right, but that's a different bracha, because you're not making the bracha. On the bittul chametz, you're already fulfilled already.
Yeah, but the thing is that.
That's it's a danger abundant. Right, so then
the worst case scenario, you're doing it lafar maisa.
Right.
But you're being yotze that mitzvah, so you're saying a bracha.
Right, because the bottom line.
You've been yotze the mitzvah.
Right, because the bottom line is we see anyway. As we'll see, if you know of any, a person that's free in, I think it's Kiseitse, that if you drop money out of your pocket and an onion picks it up and you don't even know, you still get the mitzvah. So the bottom line is, you get the mitzvah of tzedakah, even forget, even if you didn't have any machshava.
So that makes the question strong.
No, right now I'm saying I'm strengthening the question. Right, I'm saying, and yet by, so either. That's what they do bring down their reason by tzedakah. So either it's a kasha on that reason, or they're gonna say Chazal when we set up a bracha when I guess the machshav and the may when everything is happening. There's a concrete that's happening at the same time, but a machshava.
It's not that way by comments.
No, right, but nothing. They set up.
You were yotze already.
No, but they set up a separate. They set up a separate bracha. It was a separate mitzvah d'Rabbanan. Here it's the same mitzvah d'oraisa of tzedakah.
Actually, sorry, no.
Yeah.
Mitzvah b'leiv. I think we discussed this. That maybe you'll get out of the ister, but you won't be able to the mitzvah, right? Isn't that the way we?
But we assume but mitzvah b'leiv. We assume minat Torah.
Mitzvah b'leiv will get you out of.
Get you out of the d'oraisa.
Yeah. It may not. Maybe not. The mitzvah lo savir of tashvisu.
Right, that's the machol. Right, machol because Rashi and Tosfos. Yeah, if it's active or passive.
Yeah.
No, but I'm saying, but there the case is it's a different. Right, the question is, so then why didn't Chazal set up some mitzvah d'Rabbanan on after you? Yes, that to.
But what you're saying is by beer chametz, the bracha is not on the d'oraisa mitzvah; it's on the d'Rabbanan.
Yeah, it could.
Same as Ben Chanukah, specifically on the d'Rabbanan mitzvah.
Right, Chazal set up a card, and also that they wanted to make sure. They, that was because of all those reasons. Wanted to make sure you don't have chametz in your house. Right. So good. So you could ask the kasha and tzedakah. They didn't do it, so that's why there is no bracha. But right, why didn't they set up maybe on on the actual? Why didn't they set up on the actual when the ani takes the tzedakah afterwards? Or maybe since there are many times, and maybe there's a long. Maybe there's a big gap between sometimes you could, let's say you're sending the money away between the time you're out in the Sina your giving and his taking could be a big gap in between. So in terms of it was more problematic setting up a specific. But we'll have to come up with different. The bottom line, they didn't. So we have to come up with different chilukim. Why why it was set up? But because in the cases, I could, because by the time you're putting in the pushka, and then who knows, the money could be given a month later. So even though in that specific case, a lot of times they go with a little plug in terms of if mitzvahs are by Shane came by beer chametz, it's happening. That's what you're doing. You're burning the chametz at the time, at the time, or on the bedika when you're doing the checking. Right. So either way, so that's what they point out. So that's in fact that's the famous. And also, on the other, I'll just give you the Rambam's reason. And the reason why you don't make a bracha on tzedakah is because, which is our first nafkamina, is you don't. Chazal never do the brachas on mitzvahs be'adam l'chaveiro. Be'adam l'makom, the Rambam writes. That's at least we have a simon according to the Rambam. We know if something has a bracha, so we know that it's a mitzvah be'adam l'makom. If it doesn't have a bracha, then because there are some mitzvahs be'adam l'makom that don't have a bracha for other technical reasons. So therefore, the Rambam writes by a mitzvah be'adam l'chaveiro, Chazal never instituted a bracha. So that's why it doesn't have to do with. Therefore, it's totally different. So kasha from bittul or bia, those are mitzvahs be'adam l'makom, and therefore it's not a kasha. In fact, that's the famous machlokas Rambam Rashba by Shalach Manas. There's two famous schools of thought of what's the nature of the mitzvah of Shalach, the Chumas Hadeshin and the Manos Levi. It's not really, it's hard to say it's a machlokas, and the Chumas Hadeshin is a classical posek, and the Manos Levi is some, I think, some Jerusalem from Megillah Esther. So, but either way, that's what they like bringing the Chasam Sofer, they like bringing it down anyway. But the two schools of thoughts are the Chumas Hadeshin says the purpose of Shalach Manas is that it's a din in the Suda. Since it's a chi of Suda and Purim, to make sure everyone has food, and it's mostly for the poor people, but not to embarrass the poor, so we give everyone, and that's why the minhag is trying to give food that one will eat. But if you give any food, you don't say two different foods, but it's a hiddush to try to give food that someone's going to eat at the Suda because of the purpose of the Shalach Manas. And the Manas Levi says, no, the purpose is Shalom. Since Haman was around, Yeshnu Am Echad, he said the Jews are fighting, there are no Achdus, now we could try to get them, let's make the decree, V'hashma Lors Yehudim. So since the decree was because the Jews were fighting, so therefore Shalach Manas comes as a tikkun to all the Jews should be, become friendly with us. Those are the two schools of thought. My nafkamina, there are many, but we'll just stick to the one I'm interested in. So what about the following one?
Give them a suit.
Yeah, so that's right. So you give them more. I like saying you give someone an iPhone, and I don't know if an iPhone and an iTouch count as one or two, but an iPhone and an Apple Mac, or you give them a lousy bag of raisins and a Master Choice Cola, so you can't eat the iMac, but I think that if it's Shalom, you definitely make a lot of friends with the Mac. If it's Suda, you still can't eat it, even though I take a bite out of the apple, they say. But either way, that's a separate, we'll wait for Purim. So, but the nafkamina relevant to here is that what happens if someone, you go over, let's assume you're only giving one, instead of giving the usual 100. Let's say you're only giving to one person, he says, thanks, but no thanks. Whatever, my wife is going to kill me, bring more junk back to the house, or whatever the issue was, he doesn't want to take it. And that's your only Shalach Manas you gave that, or you wanted to give. Do you fulfill your mitzvah of Shalach Manas? So that depends on this issue. If it's a din in Suda, then no, you can't eat a thank you. But if it's a din in Shalom, the Ramah Paskins that you do fulfill the mitzvah. So the question is, so what about, the question is, where's the bracha on Shalach Manas? Shalach Manas is a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. We make brachas even on Minhagim. But what about a bracha on Shalach Manas? So it depends. So according to the Rashba and the Ravid, the Yisod, that since it's totally b'das acher, many mitzvahs dependent on someone else receiving it, so therefore you can't make a bracha. So if you hold, it's a din in the Suda that it has to be received. So then according to the Rashba, I understand it's dependent on that person receiving it, has the same halach of tzedakah. Chazal said no bracha. But according to the other Shita, that it's a din in Shalom, it's a din in this Bimar B'Shalom, and you don't have to receive it, so therefore, why no bracha? So now you have to come on to the Rambam Shita, that the general rule, Chazal never instituted brachas on mitzvahs, but Adam Chaveiro. In fact, that's what they point out there at Drush, that why not? Why no brachas on, we'll give a more halachic reason later, but there at Drush they explain why no bracha on mitzvahs Adam Chaveiro, because imagine if someone comes to your door, I'm starving, I'm hungry, I need some food, some money, sure. Okay, you go into the kitchen, you bring the food out, you say, 1 second. Baruch atah, you have the most kavanah, those seems you have kavanah when you're not the one hungry. And then the time you get finished the bracha, the guy drops dead or he gets sick. So the point is, you can't make, Chazal didn't institute brachas on something that interfere with the mitzvah. If the bracha is going to take away, God can wait. This person needs your help right away, and therefore that's why maybe also no bracha like pikuach nefesh. Wait a second, before I jump into the pool, I got to make the bracha here, or every time a doctor does something. So obviously it doesn't make sense to make a bracha on something which is going to interfere with the mitzvah. So that's why that's the Rambam. So that's the first major nafkamina between ben mitzvahs be'am l'makom. Again, the trick will be what's a mitzvah be'am l'makom, what's a mitzvah, we'll have to discuss what's the definition. Some are obvious, some aren't so obvious. And then again, the fact that there is a bracha would definitely show it's a mitzvah be'am l'makom, but the fact there is no bracha doesn't necessarily mean it's be'am l'chaveiro, because at Yishuv Eretz Yisrael you have to come up with different reasons why. We have some general rules why you do make a bracha when you don't, and then you have to go back and figure it out. But if there's no bracha, then we could discuss and it involves a person or people. So then we could start seriously discussing a mitzvah, whether it's a mitzvah or chaveiro or not. So that's so one key one is the bracha. Another nafkamina was the famous, we're just coming off Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot as well as the time of Tshuva, Hoshana Rabbah. They say is the Hoshana Rabbah is the Yom Kippur that we get to eat on. But there are many similarities in the Bali Kabbalah between Hoshana Rabbah and so what is Tshuva? So the difference is when you need a Tshuva between Ben Adam and Makom, a Tshuva that you did a sin between man and God. That's a private affair. No one has to know your business. Don't go around telling people. That's between you and God. You do your tshuva. However, b'dam l'chaveiro, you still might have to do, as we say, the al-chait. There is an involvement. We do perhaps also b'dam l'makam aspect. But as the Mishnah tells us in Yuma, ashirates chaveiro. It's not enough to ask God, I punched you in the face. God, do you forgive me? God may or may not, but you have to, the person you actually injured or insulted or whatever you might have done, you have to get atonement, you have to get forgiveness from that person. So one is a private affair, one is a public affair. In fact, it seems to be very simple. You go over and ask for mechila, and that's the other. It seems to be a black and white halacha, yet if you look at the Shulchan Aruch and the Rishonim, they seem to make it very complex. They talk about, the Rambam talks about, now let's say, what about the following? Let's say the person forgave you. He says his Ribono Shalom every night. It was right after Yom Kippur. He forgave me. So do I have to go and ask for forgiveness? Or I say, what's the point? Yes, the halakha is supposed to come right. Even if the person was mochli, you still have to go. Because the lesson of the Mishnah is, Ashirat, you have to actually go over Ashirat as Chaveru. He has to actually be mochli you. And another thing is, the Rambam talks about going up until 3 times. He says, Al Yavakesh, but it's usher. Don't ask more than 3 times. You have to, and the Torah writes it's a rishus. You can do more, but you don't have to. So what's 3? Magic number is 3. Like, what's this? What's with? Why are they making it so difficult? If I know the person forgave me, then what more? Why do I have to actually go over and ask for mechila? So it's a famous Maisa with Rabbi Yisrael Salanter and the Chafetz Chaim in the following case. That what happens if you spoke Lashon Hara about someone, that's the Chafetz Chaim Sefer. you spoke lashon hara about someone, and that person doesn't know about it. So now what? So how do I get mechila? So do I go over and say, you know what I said about you? I called you a creep, a jerk, etc. And so now you're gonna get the person upset. So the Chafetz Chaim seems to write. He says, yeah, you have to do it. He says that maybe he says you're not gonna have too many friends, or maybe because if you know you have to do it, then maybe you won't be saying it. But the Chafetz Chaim seems to write that even if you spoke lashon hara about someone, to get mechila, you have to go and tell the person. Whether you have to go into how details, you could just tell the person in general that if he presses you, we can discuss the details. But the Chafetz Chaim seems to say you have to go over to that person. The Rishon Salanter, he read. He said he went over to the Chafetz Chaim and said, "What are you talking about? How could it be? It doesn't make any sense. How could you go ahead? So right now you're going to make it. So you already spoke lashon hara. Now you're going to do another aveira. You're going to make the person feel bad and now not like you and all this. It doesn't make any sense to go ahead and tell the person you spoke lashon hara about him. So the Chafetz Chaim seems to say he understands the results of his argument, but he seems to say it's the Rabbeinu Yonah and Shari Tshuva. If you look for yourself, it's not so clear he's saying as strong as the Chafetz Chaim is, but that's the way of the same famous machlokas the Chafetz Chaim and Yishol Solanter, whether you have to go ahead and go ahead. So it doesn't make any sense. Why would you have to go ahead? So there's a famous piece of Rav Hutner in many places. In the Pachad Yitzchak, he has a thing Yom Kippur, Purim, many places. He talks about the concept, which is our topic of B'nai Chaveira, the concept of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. So we all know, love your neighbor like yourself. You have a mitzvah to love someone else just like you love yourself. However, the Rav Hutner points out, but people don't get the secondary message of it. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha is a two-way street. It's not enough that you love someone else the way they love you, that the way you love yourself, but you have to, what he writes is, you have to be an ahov yourself. You have to be a person that people like you. You have a chiyuv that with his lashon he uses is that the person should have kindness on you. In fact, that's what he talks about. What's the concept of the Rambam of 3 times? And the concept of it, he says you have to take away the tarumas, the tightness against you. In other words, the person has feelings. If a person has feelings about you, that's a chisaron of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. If I have to be an ahov. Obviously, if a person's crazy, that's not my issue. But I'm talking to normal people. If they have it has to be a real tightness. Today we live in the world of the offended. Everyone's offended by anything you say, so you can't take that too seriously. What I tell people is, as long as you didn't say anything offensive, that's all you could control. People are offended by anything.
Is he explaining the Chafetz Chaim? Like, was he writing, when he wrote the Pachad, was he actually explaining that aspect? The machlokas or he's writing totally independent?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't remember. I'm not sure if I'm tying this into what they said, or he actually...
So, otherwise he's saying one has to be ahuv.
But no, he's saying part of the mitzvah of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha is we know the simple, but he says part of it is on me. I have to be someone who someone else could fulfill the v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. And he goes into the whole thing of how does a person become ahuv? Like, it's the opposite, as we'll get into more when we go into the series. Is let's say you don't get along with your next door neighbor. And there's a big snowstorm. I don't know if he uses this example. You should go ahead the next morning, you should shovel his driveway. The guy you just got, why should you shovel his driveway? Not for him, it's for you. Because when you do something for other people from Hav and Ava, that's how you get feelings in terms of about being a giver, not a taker. We'll get into this more when we get into more of the chesed than that, but that's what he points out. You have an obligation to make yourself beloved to someone else. Again, so anything you did wrong, you have to try to reconcile. obviously you're not responsible if people are crazy and they have tires on you for no reason. You can't go worrying about everyone in terms of.
About the prat. According to Ram, the video has to be enforced the prat. The whole machloek is a video whether you have to do the prat or just say generally. I'm wondering this. You said that if you go to someone else, in fact, you don't have to say. You just say, "I did anything."
In fact, that's another machlokas among the poskim about whether could I send a third party to do the mechila. In other words, there's a machlokas among the. Could I tell? So I think the Mishnah Brewer I think has a pshara. He says it depends. In a situation where the person, if he's not, if the person's to be offended, so it depends how you look at it. It's the same issue by shalach manas. Some say umishloach manas l'shureyu. Perhaps the bigger covet is having someone else. Mm-hmm. So it depends on the society or what the scenario is. If sometimes sending a messenger to do something is a covet, so then
what I'm wondering about is the Rambam's insistence on in vidui of the prat, and actually stating what the yisur was. Does that apply when you go to ask mechila from an individual? And then in Ben Chavero, do you have to be in the first of the prat, or is it enough just to say?
No, right. That seems to be right, and that seems to be the issue here between Rabbi Selevan.
Yeah, but the Rambam, what I'm wondering about is that's part of the issue of the Rambam.
Oh yeah, right.
In Rishonim, because they have machlokas where you have to state the prat, or not.
That could be told in also unless you want a machalek between mitzvah and mamakam, right?
Yeah.
But as we'll see, but so basically, so the second nafkamin is tshuva. But makom, that's a private affair. But chavero, I wouldn't say it's a public affair, but definitely has to involve the person you wrong. The one last nafkamina, and about the issue of spending money. So we all know, building a sukkah, unless if you build it yourself, maybe it doesn't, because you have to buy it. You can't buy the schach at Home Depot. You have to buy the kosher schach, so it's expensive. You buy tefillin, talis, etc. So we all know we have to spend we have to spend money for doing mitzvahs b'am l'makom. What about mitzvahs b'am l'chaveiro? So obviously tzedakah is a clear exception to the rule. Obviously it is a mitzvah tzedakah. You give your money to someone else. But putting tzedakah aside, what about bikar cholim, kfura, nicham avelim? Am I obligated to spend money? So that's what the post can point out. I have no chiyuv in general to spend my own funds. That's the whole machlokas that the Gemara talks about in Kedushin regarding the mitzvah of kibbut aveim. Kibbut aveim, that's the whole sugya in Kedushin, mishal av or mishal ben. Who has to pay for it? So we generally assume mishal av. We assume that even though you have obligation, you have to do things for your parents, but that doesn't have to come out of your own pocket. If they have the money, they should pay for it. In fact, that's the famous ma'aser they say over to Chaim Soloveitchik, that he was. Well, I guess it was one of the kids in school. I'm guessing was a big maspin. I'm assuming you're not or even like his parents, one of the two, and it was Ben Azmanim, and so Rav Chaim saw him, I guess, learning in the Beit HaMedrash. Said, you got to go home. Your parents want to see you. He said, no, they didn't send me any money for a ticket or for the train pass. So we know this sugya. The Gemara says, Mishalav, if they're not paying for it, I don't have to. He said, you're right. So start walking. In other words, you might not have any chiyuv but you're not paying that in order to shalav. If there are other means, but we'll come into that more. But the point being is, but normally benam chavero yichayev in the service. But I'm not chayav to pay for it. So by benam l'makom, the halacha demands not only that we do the mitzvah, we even have to spend our own money on it. Masha'enki benam l'chavero is usually limited to gufo, is actually exerting ourselves and doing it, and not actually paying money. As the Gemara says by Kibbutz, which we'll get to also, which will be one of the questions in terms of where does Kibbutz Aveim fit into, mitzvah b'dam u'makah, mitzvah b'dam chaveiro, in terms of that. So we had, so we have so for three nafkaminas. One is whether you make a bracha, whether you make it a mitzvah b'dam u'makah and a mitzvah b'dam chaveiro. The second nafkamina is tshuva. Is tshuva a private affair or a public affair? And the third one we have is the spending money. Do you have to spend your own money in order to do a mitzvah? So a mitzvah b'nadam l'makom, definitely yes. How much you have to spend on a mitzvah, that's a whole discussion. You know, how much you have to spend on a hidduh mitzvah, on a regular mitzvah, there's a discussion where the limit is, but you clearly have to spend. Mashenke b'nadam l'chaveiro is normally limited to the service you do. You're chayav to do that, but you don't necessarily have to, spend your own money in terms of the general chiyuv of b'nadam l'chaveiro. I guess we'll continue next week on some more nafkaminas between b'nadam l'makom and l'chaveiro, which will lead us to many different topics. And then afterwards, that we'll go into maybe specific mitzvahs of Bikur Cholim or ones we pick into Lashon Hara maybe. And we'll see within the many mitzvahs, we're going to see even within the mitzvahs b'nadam l'chaveiro, we're going to see chilukim between mitzvahs b'nadam l'makom and b'nadam l'chaveiro. So, kibbud aim we'll use as a springboard, but we'll discuss kibbud aim, Lashon Hara, Bikur Cholim. We'll discuss all those mitzvahs in the coming weeks.